the one thing that can stop the Spectre, and he realizes that the Spectre has lost complete hold over his humanity, and this is why he's on a rampage. So President Clinton secures the Spear of Destiny, puts it in the hands of Superman, who, of course, doesn't want to take a life, but based on the evidence, realizes that the Spectre has become so extreme that it's the only way to stop the Spectre from destroying anyone or anything else. And so Superman takes the spear with him, confronts the Spectre, and the Spectre warns Superman of what can happen. He warns Superman that the spear has been tainted by Hitler since he held it for so long, 5 decades ago. But Superman goes ahead and uses a spear to kill the Spectre. And then we get this whole nightmare scenario in which Superman becomes a tyrant. He basically becomes the ruler of the world. Very much like the Superman who we see in the Injustice Gods Among Us video game. But fortunately, this turns out to be a nightmare scenario which Superman is able to work his way out of. And the Spectre is there and says, "You are free now, Kal-El. Let me take the spear. I'm going to dispose of it." And Superman's doubtful. He says, "But look at what you did. The reason why we're here is because of what you did in Vlatava." And the Spectre explains that he was out of balance, badly out of balance, but he since regained control of himself, and he will no longer punish humanity as a whole. Rather, he will deal with evil on a personal case-by-case basis. And it's enough for Superman. And he says, "Very well, fair enough." He gives the spear to the Spectre, who throws the spear far out into space. And now, this is not the last that we'll see or hear of the spear. It actually plays an important role in a couple of story arcs from now. Next up, we get an interesting take by Mrs. Ostrander and Mandrake on a piece of the Spectre's Silver Age history. They do a really nice job of taking the Spectre's first Silver Age appearance and weaving it into the post-crisis timeline. And that comes about in issue number 26 of the Spectre. It's actually a Christmas issue, which I am going to review in its entirety for the 2019 Comics and History Christmas special. Really interesting. It's a Spectre book, and yet it has this really heartwarming story inside of it. And talk about one of the biggest oxymorons in literary history. A heartwarming Spectre story. You gotta know, only Ostrander-Mandrake could pull it off. But the first 3 pages of this issue are really interesting. Asmodeus returns after all that goes on in Vlatava and with the Spear of Destiny, basically running more interference. Asmodeus will play a pretty major role in the Desecration storyline, which I'll be talking about in part 4 of this episode. But here we see Asmodeus running around and threatening different people who are close to Corrigan and the Spectre. Madame Xanadu is threatened. Father Kramer is threatened. And Jim goes to check on Father Kramer at his home. And he's relieved to find that Kramer is fine. And so Jim explains to the Padre who Asmodeus is. And in a bit of retconning, Corrigan explains that shortly after World War II came to an end, the Spectre and Asmodeus had their first confrontation. They had a battle in the skies, and they were hitting each other back and forth pretty good. But then, as Corrigan relates, Asmodeus hit the Spectre with some powerful stuff, which basically rendered the Spectre with a case of psychic amnesia. Corrigan recalls that the Spectre fell to Earth. As he fell to Earth, the Spectre's ectoplasmic form shrank in size, hardened, and became almost lifelike replica of Jim Corrigan. Now, this backfired on Asmodeus. He too fell to Earth, shrank in size, and took on human form. Now, Corrigan explains that his memories of being the Spectre were gone, and they would stay gone for 20 years. So in that time, Jim Corrigan simply resumed his career full-time as a police detective, and he explains to Father Kramer that he didn't age for 2 decades, and he didn't question why. And it wasn't until a seance which he attended in which the psychic amnesia was broken, and there's a really neat panel by Mr. Mandrake, great homage to Murphy Anderson's depiction of the seance back in showcase number 60, in which the Spectre appears to emanate from Jim Corrigan's body. And now, there's no explanation going forward as to how much of the original volume of the Spectre carried over into the post-crisis reality. It's not even clear whether for a short time the Spectre thought that it was a separate entity that was being hosted by Jim Corrigan. But in any event, the Spectre's very first Silver Age appearance is made part of the post-crisis canon here. Again, a really neat bit of work by Mr. Ostrander-Mandrake to honor that which came before and to include it in this wonderful tapestry that they were setting up for the Spectre here. Okay, folks, now looking at where we are with the timer here, I'm going to end things a few minutes early here just because there's a couple of neat returns made by Golden Age characters and the issues leading up to 0 Hour. And I think if I get started with talking about those now, I'm only going to get cut off by the timer. So for part 4 of episode 124, I'll be talking about the return of Percival Pop, the Super Cop, Clarice Winston. I'll also be talking about 0 Hour and the 0 issue, which presented a major revelation with regards to the nature of the Spectre and the Spectre's creation. And then I'll get talking about the Desecration story arc. The one story arc which actually received a fair amount of negative criticism from readers, but still a very powerful story arc with a lot of important character development, both for Jim Corrigan and the Spectre. So, looking forward to having you all with me in a couple of weeks for part 4. In the meantime, if you want to get in contact with me, you can email me at comicsandhistory@gmail.com. You can also head on over to Facebook and like the Comics and History Facebook page so that you get regular updates about upcoming show releases. Until another 2 weeks have come and gone, my friends, this class is once again in recess.